Peace, love, and light, y'all. It's your girl. Hold on. Let me get my life together. I'm over here trying to record on Instagram, too. And I didn't do something right. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's try that again. Peace, love, and light, family. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers. Tuning in with you all for another reading of Black Boy by Richard Wright. We are now on chapter 12. Before I get into this, I just want to show you some things I'm working on. For one, my t-shirt is made by my good friend E. Her clothing company is called No More. And this is a very older edition. E is out here doing the daggone thing. She done upgraded. She got baseball caps, very fly clothing, and it's No More, KNOMOOR. And she's just, all about that knowledge and power and promoting that peace and positivity amongst our people. And so I'm here for it. I love her. I support her. I myself am the designer behind More of My Crochet. Well, I changed it to More of My Creations because I'm learning this stuff. But this is one of my creations, a scrap scarf for fall. I'm going to do maybe about 4 more rows and be done with it. It's not going to be that big or that expensive. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I got going on. So, let me just hop into the book. So the last few chapters, Brother Richard has moved to Memphis, Tennessee to get away from the South, Mississippi. He is taking on different odd jobs. He was taking on odd jobs before he left Mississippi, but now he's out in Memphis, Tennessee, and he moved into a boarding home, which he thought was a whorehouse when he first popped up on it. The very first house he saw, the lady invited him in. She has a daughter that's 17, like Richard, and the daughter, Bess, is trying to, marry him and, ready to build a family. Don't know him from a can of paint. So that's what he's dealing with, and he just got his first job up there. He also got his first incident running with a local boy that gypped him. They found some liquor in the yard, and some white man came and bought it from him, but come to find out, the young man and the white man was in cahoots together, and Richard never got his cut of the money. It's a lot going on. So, chapter 12 of Black Boy. While wandering aimlessly about the streets of Memphis, gaping at the tall buildings and the crowds, killing time, eating bags of popcorn, I was struck by an odd and sudden idea. If I had attempted to work for an optical company in Jackson and had failed, why should I not try to work for an optical company in Memphis? Memphis was not a small town like Jackson. It was urban, and I felt that no one would hold the trivial trouble I had had in Jackson against me. I looked for the address of a company in the directory and walked boldly into the building. Rode up in the elevator with a fat, round, yellow Negro of about 5 feet in height. At the 5th floor, I stepped into an office. A white man rose to meet me. "Pull you off your hat," he said. "Oh, yes, sir," I said, jerking off my hat. "What do you want?" "I was wondering if you needed a boy," I said. "I worked for an optical company for a short while in Jackson." "Why did you leave?" he asked. "I had a little trouble there," I said honestly. "Did you steal something?" "No, sir," I said. "A white boy there didn't want me to learn the optical trade and ran me off the job. Come and sit down." I sat and recounted the story from beginning to end. "All right, Mr. Crane," he said, "but you won't get a chance to learn the optical trade here. That's our policy." I told him that I understood and accepted his policy. I was hired at $8 per week and promised a raise of $1 a week until my wages reached 10. Though this was less than I had been offered for the cafe job, I accepted it. I liked the open, honest way in which the man talked to me, and too, the place seemed clean, brisk, businesslike. And I think the other job at the cafe he was supposed to have started the night before, or maybe this night when he was getting this job, and it was going to be $10 the first week, 12 the next. So he's taking a little cut by just getting $8 a week, and then promised raise of $1 a week until his wages reached 10. So he would only get 2 wages. So 10 would be the most he could make there, and he was going to start at 10 and end up at 12 at the cafe job. Interesting. So I was hired to run errands and wash eyeglasses after they had come from the Rube smeared machines. Each evening I had to take sacks of packages to the post office for mailing. It was light work, and I was fast on my feet. At noon, I would forego my lunch hour and run errands for the white men who were employed in the shop. I would buy their lunches, take their suits out to have them pressed, pay their light, telephone, and gas bills, and deliver notes for them to the stenographer girlfriends in nearby office buildings. The first day, I made $1.50 in tips. I deposited the money I had left from my trip and resolved to live off my There were about a dozen white men in the sixth floor shop where I spent most of my time. They varied from Ku Klux Klanners to Jews, from, what is this word? Theosophists? To just plain poor whites. I gotta look that word up. Matter of fact, I will look it up. Let's see. Because I don't like not knowing what words are. Theosophists.
According to Wikipedia, Theosophy is an esoteric religious movement established in the United States during the late 19th century.
Okay. Can I just get the definition again? Any number of philosophies maintaining that a knowledge of God may be achieved through spiritual ecstasy, direct intuition, or special individual relations, especially the movement founded in 1875 as the Theosophical Society. What the hell kind of definition is that? Theosophists. Okay. We're going to move along. I spent most of my time. They varied from Ku Klux Klanners to Jews, from Theosophists to just plain poor whites. Although I could detect disdain, let me highlight that though, because that is something to go back to and do more research on. Just because I don't understand it, I could get an understanding of it. That is how I have always learned words growing up. When I don't understand something, I go look it up and then try to use it in a sentence and all that jazz. So moving along. Although I could detect disdain and hatred in their attitudes, they never shouted at me or abused me. It was fairly easy to contemplate the race issue in the shop without reaching those heights of fear that devastated me. A measure of objectivity entered into my observations of white men and women. Either I could stand more mental strain than formerly, or I had discovered deep within me ways of handling it. When I returned to Mrs. Moss's that Monday night, she was surprised that I had changed my plans and had taken a new job. I showed her my bank book and told her my plan for saving money and bringing my mother to Memphis. As I talked to her, I tried to tell her, I showed her my bank book and told her my plan for saving money and bringing my mother to Memphis. As I talked to her, I tried to tell from her manner if Bess had said anything about what had happened between us, but Mrs. Moss was bland and motherly as always. Bess avoided me, refusing to speak when we were alone together, but when her mother was present, she was polite. A few days later, Mrs. Moss came to me with a baffled look in her eyes. "What's happened between you and Bess?" she asked. "Nothing," I lied, burning with shame. "She don't seem to like you no more," she said. I wanted you all to kind of hit it off." She looked at me searchingly. "Don't you like her none?" I could not answer or look at her. I wondered if she had told Bess to give herself to me. "Well," she drawled, sighing, "I guess folks just have to love each other naturally. You can't make 'em." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Bess will find somebody." I felt sick, filled with the consciousness of the woman's helplessness, of her naive hope. Time and again she told me that Bess loved me, wanted me. Mind you, this is the second day of him living there. She even suggested that I try Bess and see if I like her. Ain't no harm in that. And her words evoked in me a pity for her that had no name. Finally, it became unbearable. One night, I returned home from work and found Mrs. Moss sitting by the stove in the hall, nodding. She blinked her eyes and smiled. "How are you, son?" she asked. "Pretty good," I said. "Ain't you and Bess got to be friends or something yet?" "No, ma'am," I said softly. "How come you don't like Bess?" she demanded. "Oh, I don't know." I was becoming angry. "It's 'cause she ain't so bright?" "No, ma'am. Bess bright," I lied. "Then how come?" I still could not tell her. "You and Bess could have this house for your home," she went on. "You all could bring up your children here." But people have to find their own way to each other, I said. Young folks ain't got no sense these days, she said at last. If somebody had mixed feelings for me when I was a gal, I sure would have taken it. Mrs. Moss, I said, I think I'd better move. Move then, she exploded. You ain't got no sense. I went to my room and began to pack. A knock came at the door. I opened it. Mrs. Moss stood in the doorway weeping. Son, forgive me, she said. I didn't mean it. I wouldn't hurt you for nothing. You just like a son to me. That's all right, I said, but I better move. No, she wailed. Then you ain't forgive me. When a body asks forgiveness, they means it. I stared. Bess appeared in the doorway. Don't leave, Richard, she said. We won't bother you no more, Mrs. Moss said. I wilted, baffled, sorry, ashamed. Mrs. Moss took Bess's hand and led her away. I centered my attention now upon making enough money to send for my mother and brother. I saved each penny I came by, stinting myself on food, walking to work, eating out of paper bags, living on a pint of milk and 2 sweet rolls for breakfast, a hamburger and peanuts for lunch, and a can of beans, which I would eat at night in my room. I was used to hunger, and I did not need much food to keep me alive. I now had more money than I had ever had before, and I began patronizing secondhand bookstores, buying magazines and books. In this way, I became acquainted with periodicals like Harper's Magazine, The Atlantic Monthly, and The American Mercury. I would buy them for a few cents, read them, then resell them to the bookseller. Once, Mrs. Moss questioned me about my reading. What you reading all them books for, boy? I just like to. You studying the law? No, ma'am. Well, I reckon you know what you're doing, she said. Though I did not have to report for work until 9 o'clock each morning, I would arrive at 8 and go into the lobby of the downstairs bank where I knew the Negro porter and read the early edition of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, thereby saving myself 5 cents each day, which I spent for lunch. After reading, I would watch the black porter perform his morning ritual. He would get a mop, bucket, soap, flakes, water, then would pause dramatically, roll his eyes to the ceiling, and sing out, Lord, today, Lord, today, I'm still working for the white folks. And he would mop until he sweated. He hated his job and talked incessantly of leaving to work in the post office. The most colorful of the Negro boys on the job was Shorty, the round, yellow, fat elevator operator. He had tiny, beady eyes that looked out between rows of Hold on. Let me round that back. The most colorful of the Negro boys on the job was Shorty, the round, yellow, fat elevator operator. He had tiny, beady eyes that looked out between rolls of flesh with a hard but humorous stare. He had the complexion of a Chinese, a short forehead, and 3 chins. Physiologically, he was the most amazing specimen of the Southern Negro I had ever met. Hard-headed, sensible, a reader of magazines and books, he was proud of his race and indignant about its wrongs. But in the presence of whites, he would play the role of a clown on the most debased and degraded type. One day he needed 25 cents to buy his lunch. Just watch me get a quarter from the first white man I see, he told me as I stood in the elevator that morning. A white man who worked in the building stepped into the elevator and waited to be lifted to his floor. Shorty sang in a low mumble, smiling, rolling his eyes, looking at the white man roguishly. I'm hungry, Mr. White Man. I need a quarter for lunch. The white man ignored him. Shorty, his hands on the controls of the elevator, sang again. I ain't gonna move this damned old elevator till I get a quarter, Mr. White Man. The hell with you, Shorty, the white man said, ignoring him and chewing on his black cigar. I'm hungry, Mr. White Man. I'm dying for a quarter, Shorty sang, drooling, drawling, humming his words. If you don't take me to my floor, you will die, the white man said, smiling a little for the first time. But this black son of a bitch sure needs a quarter, Shorty sang, grimacing, clowning, ignoring the white man's threat. Come on, you black bastard, I gotta work, the white man said, intrigued by the element of sadism involved, enjoying it. It'll cost you 25 cents, Mr. White Man. Just a quarter, just 2 bits, Shorty moaned. There was silence. Shorty threw the lever and the elevator went up and stopped about 5 feet short of the floor upon which the white man worked. Can't go no more, Mr. White Man, unless I get my quarter, he said in a tone that sounded like crying. What would you do for a quarter? The white man asked, still gazing off. I'll do anything for a quarter, Shorty sang. What, for example? The white man asked. Shorty giggled, swung around, bent over, and poked out his broad, fleshy ass. You can kick me for a quarter, he sang, looking impishly at the white man out the corners of his eyes. The white man laughed softly, jingled some coins in his pocket, took out one, and thumped it to the floor. Shorty stooped to pick it up, and the white man bared his teeth and swung his foot into Shorty's rump with all the strength of his body. Shorty let out a howling laugh that echoed up and down the elevator shaft. Now, open this door, you goddamn black son of a bitch, the white man said, smiling with tight lips. Yes, sir, Shorty sang, but first he picked up the quarter and put it into his mouth. This monkey's got the peanuts, he chortled. He opened the door and the white man stepped out and looked back at Shorty and went toward his office. You're alright, Shorty, you son of a bitch, he said. I know it, Shorty screamed, then let his voice trail off in a gale of wild laughter. I witnessed this scene or its variant at least a score of times, and I felt no anger or hatred, only disgust and loathing. Once I asked him, how in God's name can you do that? I needed a quarter and I got it, he said soberly, proudly. But a quarter can't pay you for what he did to you, I said. Listen, nigga, he said to me, my ass is tough and quarters is scarce. I never discussed the subject with him after that. That's crazy. Other Negroes worked in the building, an old man whom we call Edison, his son John, and a night janitor who answered to the name of Dave. At noon, when I was not running errands, I would join the rest of the Negroes in a little room at the front of the building overlooking the street. Here, in this underworld pocket of the building, we munched our lunches and discussed the ways of white folks toward Negroes. When two or more of us were talking, it was impossible for this subject not to come up. Each of us hated and feared the whites, yet a white man put in a sudden appearance, we would have assumed silent, obedient smiles. To our minds, the white folks formed a kind of super world. What was said by them during working hours was rehashed and weighed here. How they looked, what they wore, what moves they were in, who had outdistanced whom in business, who was replacing whom on the job, who was getting fired and who was getting hired. But never once did we openly say that we occupied none but subordinate positions in the building. Our talk was restricted to the petty relations which formed the core of life for us. But under all of our talk floated a latent sense of violence. The whites had drawn a line over which we dared not step, and we accepted that line because our bread was at stake. But within our boundaries, we, too, drew a line that included our right to bread regardless of the indignities or degradations involved in getting it. If a white man had sought to keep us from obtaining a job or enjoying the rights of citizenship, we would have bowed silently to his power. But if he had sought to deprive us of a dime, blood might have been split. Hence, our daily lives were so bound up with trivial objectives that to capitulate when challenged was tantamount to surrendering the right to life itself. Our anger was like the anger of children, passing quickly from one petty grievance to another, from the memory of one slight wrong to another. You know what the bastard Olin said to me this morning? John would ask, biting into a juicy hamburger. What? Shorty would ask. Well, I brought him his change from paying his gas bill, and he said, put it here in my pocket. My hands are dirty. John said, I just laid the money on the bench besides him. I ain't no personal slave to him, and I'll be damned if I put his own money in his own pocket. Hell, you're right, Shorty would say. White folks just don't think, old man Edison would say. You sure got to watch him, Dave, the night janitor would say. He would have slept in the room on a cot after his night's cleaning. He would be ready now to keep a date with some girlfriend. Falk sent me to have his suit pressed, I would say. He didn't give me a penny, told me he would remember it on payday. Ain't that some nerve, John would say. You can't eat his memories, Shorty would say. But you gotta keep on doing them favors, old man Edison would say. If you don't, they won't like you. I'm going north one of these days, Shorty would say. We would all laugh, knowing that Shorty would never leave, that he depended too much upon the whites for the food he ate. What would you do up north? I asked Shorty. I'd pass for Chinese, Shorty would say, and we would laugh again. The lunch hour would pass, and we would go back to work, but there would be in our faces not one whit of sentiment we had felt during the hour of discussion. One day I went to the optical counter of a department store to deliver a pair of eyeglasses. The counter was empty of customers, and a tall, florid-faced white man looked at me curiously. He was unmistakably a Yankee, for his physical build differed sharply from that of the lanky Southerner. "Will you please sign for this, sir?" I asked, presenting the account book and the eyeglasses. He picked up the book and the glasses, but his eyes were still upon me. "Say, boy, I'm from the North," he said quietly. I held very still. Was this a trap? He had mentioned a taboo subject, and I wanted to wait until I knew what he meant. Among the topics that Southern white men did not like to discuss with Negroes were the following: American white women, the Ku Klux Klan, France and how Negro soldiers fared while there, French women, Jack Johnson, the entire northern part of the United States, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, U.S. Grant, General Sherman, Catholics, the popes, Jews, the Republican Party, slavery, social equality, communism, socialism, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, or any topic calling for positive knowledge or manly self-assertion on the part of the Negro. The most accepted topics were sex and religion. I did not look at the man or answer. With one sentence, he had lifted out of the silent dark the race question, and I stood on the edge of a precipice. "Don't be afraid of me," he went on. "I just want to ask you one question." "Yes, sir," I said in a waiting, neutral tone. "Tell me, boy, are you hungry?" he asked seriously. I stared at him. He had spoken one word that touched the very soul of me, and I could not talk to him, could not let him know I was starving myself to save money to go north. I did not trust him, but my face did not change its expression. "Oh, no, sir," I said, managing a smile. I was hungry, and he knew it. He was a white man, and I felt that if I told him I was hungry, I would have been revealing something shameful. "Boy, I can see hunger in your face and eyes," he said. "I get enough to eat," I lied. "Then why do you keep so thin?" he asked me. "Well, I suppose I'm just that way naturally," I lied. "You're just scared, boy," he said. "Oh, no, sir," I lied again. I could not look at him. I wanted to leave the counter, yet he was a white man, and I had learned not to walk abruptly away from a white man when he was talking to me. I stood, my eyes looking away. He ran his hand into his pocket and pulled out a dollar bill. "Here, take this dollar and buy yourself some food," he said. "No, sir," I said. "Don't be a fool," he said. "You're ashamed to take it. God, boy, don't let a thing like that stop you from taking a dollar and eating." The more he talked, the more it became impossible for me to take the dollar. I wanted it, but I could not look at it. I wanted to speak, but I could not move my tongue. I wanted him to leave me alone. He frightened me. "Say something," he said. All about us in the store were piles of goods. White men and women went from counter to counter. It was summer, and from a high ceiling was suspended a huge electric fan that whirred. I stood waiting for a white man to give me the signal that would let me go. "I don't understand it," he said through his teeth. "How far did you go in school?" "Through the 9th grade, but it was really the 8th, I told him. "You see, our studies in the 9th grade were more or less a review of what we had in the 8th grade. Silence. He had not asked me for this long explanation, but I had spoken at length to fill up the yawning, shameful gap that loomed between us. I had spoken to try to drag the unreal nature of the conversation back to safe and sound Southern ground. Of course, the conversation was real. It dealt with my welfare, but it had brought to the surface of day all the dark fears I had known all my life. The Yankee white man did not know how dangerous his words were. There are some elusive, profound, recondite things that men find it hard to say to other men, but with the Negro, it is the little things of life that become hard to say, for these tiny items shape his destiny. A man will seek to express his relation to the stars, but when a man's consciousness has been riveted upon obtaining a loaf of bread, that loaf of bread is as important as the stars. Another white man walked up to the counter and sighed with relief. "Do you want the dollar?" the man asked. "No, sir," I whispered. "All right," he said, "just forget it." He signed the account book and took the eyeglasses. I stuffed the book into my bag and turned from the counter and walked down the aisle, feeling a physical tingling along my spine, knowing that the white man knew I was really hungry. I avoided him after that. Whenever I saw him, I felt in a queer way that he was my enemy, for he knew how I felt, and the safety of my life in the South depended upon how well I concealed from all whites what I felt. One summer morning, I stood at a sink in the rear of the factory, washing a pair of eyeglasses that had just come from the polishing machines, whose throbbing shook the floor upon which I stood. At each machine, a white man was bent forward, working intently. To my left, sunshine poured through a window, lighting up the rug smears and making the factory look garnished, violent, dangerous. It was nearing noon, and my mind was drifting toward my daily lunch of a hamburger and a bag of peanuts. It had been a routine, a day more or less like the other days I had spent on the job as errand boy and washer of eyeglasses. I was at peace with the world. That is, at peace in the only way in which a black boy in the South can be at peace with a world of white men. Perhaps it was the mere sameness of the day that soon made it different from the other days. Maybe the white men who operated the machines felt bored with their dull automatic task and hankered for some kind of excitement. Anyway, I presently heard footsteps behind me and turned my head. At my elbow stood a young white man, Mr. Olin, the immediate foreman under whom I worked. He was smiling and observing me as I cleaned emery dust from the eyeglasses. "Boy, how's it going?" he asked. "Oh, fine, sir," I answered with false heartiness, falling quickly into that nigger being a good-natured boy in the presence of a white man pattern, a pattern into which I could now slide easily, although I was wondering if he had any criticism to make of my work. He continued to hover wordlessly at my side. What did he want? It was unusual for him to stand there and watch me. I wanted to look at him, but was afraid to. "Say, Richard, do you believe that I'm your friend?" he asked me. The question was so loaded with danger that I could not reply at once. I scarcely knew Mr. Olin. My relationship to him had been the typical relationship of Negroes to Southern whites. He gave me orders, and I said yes, sir, and obeyed them. Now, without warning, he was asking me if I thought that he was my friend, and I knew that all Southern white men fancied themselves as friends of niggers. While fishing for an answer that would say nothing, I smiled. "I mean," he persisted, "do you think I'm your friend?" "Well," I answered, skirting the vast racial chasm between us, "I hope you are." "I am," he said emphatically. I continued to work, wondering what motives were prompting him. Already apprehension was rising in me. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. "We don't want you to get hurt," he explained. "We like you around here. You act like a good boy." "Yes, sir," I said. "What's wrong?" "You don't deserve to get into trouble," he explained. "Wait a minute. You don't deserve to get into trouble," he went on. "Have I done something that somebody doesn't like?" I asked, my mind frantically sweeping over all my past actions, weighing them in the light of the way of the Southern white men thought Negroes should act. "Well, I don't know," he said and paused, letting his words sink meaningfully into my mind. He lit a cigarette. "Do you know Harrison?" He was referring to a Negro boy of about my own age who worked across the street for a rival optical house. Harrison and I knew each other casually, but there had never been the slightest trouble between us. "Yes, sir," I said. "I know him." "Well, be careful," Mr. Olin said. "He's after you." "After me? For what?" "He's got a terrific grudge against you," the white man explained. "What have you done to him?" The eyeglasses I was washing were forgotten. My eyes were upon Mr. Olin's face, trying to make out what he meant. Was this something serious? I did not trust the white man, and neither did I trust Harrison. Negroes who worked on jobs in the South were usually loyal to their white bosses. They felt that that was the best way to ensure their jobs. Had Harrison felt that I had in some way jeopardized his job? Who was my friend, the white man or the black boy? "I haven't done anything to Harrison," I said. "Well, you better watch that nigger Harrison," Mr. Olin said in a low, confidential tone. "A little while ago I went down to get a Coca-Cola, and Harrison was waiting for you at the door of the building with a knife. He asked me when you was coming down, said he was going to get you, said you call him a dirty name. Now, we don't want any fighting or bloodshed on the job." I still doubted the white man, yet thought that perhaps Harrison had really interpreted something I said as an insult. "I've got to see that boy and talk to him," I said, thinking out loud. "No, you better not," Mr. Olin said. "You better let some of us white boys talk to him." "But how did this start?" I asked, still doubting but half believing. "He just told me that he was going to get even with you, going to cut you and teach you a lesson," he said. "But don't you worry, let me handle this." He patted my shoulder and went back to his machine. He was an important man in the factory, and I had always respected his word. He had the authority to order me to do this or that. Now, why would he joke with me? White men did not often joke with Negroes. Therefore, what he said was serious. I was upset. We were black boys, worked long, hard hours for what few pennies we earned. We were edgy and tense. Perhaps that crazy Harrison was really after me. My appetite was gone. I had to settle this thing. A white man had walked into my delicately balanced world and had tipped it, and I had to right it before I could feel safe. Yes, I would go directly to Harrison and ask what was the matter, what I had said that he resented. Harrison was black and so was I. I would ignore the warning of the white man and talk face to face with a boy of my own color. At noon, I went across the street and found Harrison sitting on a box in the basement. He was eating lunch and reading a pulp magazine. As I approached him, he ran his hand into his pocket and looked at me with cold, watchful eyes. "Say, Harrison, what's all this about?" I asked, standing cautiously 4 feet from him. He looked at me a long time and did not answer. "I haven't done anything to you," I said, "and I ain't got nothing against you," he mumbled, still watchful. "I don't bother nobody. But Mr. Olin said that you came over to the factory this morning looking for me with the knife." "Oh, no," he said, more at ease now. "I ain't been in your factory all day." He had not looked at me as he spoke. "Then what did Mr. Olin mean?" I asked. "I'm not angry with you." "Shucks, I thought you was looking for me to cut me," Harrison explained. "Mr. Olson came over here this morning and said you was going to kill me with a knife the moment you saw me. He said you was mad at me because I insulted you, but I ain't said nothing about you." He still had not looked at me. He rose. "And I haven't said anything about you," I said. Finally, he looked at me, and I felt better. We two, black boys, each working for $10 a week, stood staring at each other, thinking, comparing the motives of the absent white man, each asking himself if he could believe the other. "But why would Mr. Olin tell me things like that?" I asked. Oh, wait a minute. Harrison dropped his head. He laid his sandwich aside. He stammered and pulled from his pocket a long, gleaming knife. It was already open. "I was just waiting to see what you was going to do to me." I leaned weakly against the wall, feeling sick, my eyes upon the sharp steel blade of the knife. "You were going to cut me?" I asked. "If you had cut me, I was going to cut you first," he said. "I ain't taking no chances." "Are you angry with me about something?" I asked. "Man, I ain't mad at nobody," Harrison said uneasily. I felt how close I had come to being slashed. Had I come suddenly upon Harrison, he would have thought I was trying to kill him, and he would have stabbed me, perhaps killed me. And what did it matter if one nigga killed another? "Look here," I said, "don't believe what Mr. Olin says." "I see now," Harrison said. "He's playing a dirty trick on us. He's trying to make us kill each other for nothing." "How come he want to do that?" Harrison asked. I shook my head. Harrison sat but still played with the open knife. I began to doubt. Was he really angry with me? Was he waiting until I turned my back to stab me? I was in torture. "I suppose it's fun for white men to see niggas fight," I said, forcing a laugh. "But you might have killed me," Harrison said. "To white men, we're like dogs and cocks," I said. "I don't want to cut you," Harrison said. "And I don't want to cut you," I said. Standing well out of each other's reach, we discussed the problem and decided that we would keep silent about our conference. We would not let Mr. Olin know that we knew that he was egging us to fight. We agreed to ignore any further provocations, and at 1 o'clock I went back to the factory. Mr. Olin was waiting for me, his manner grave, his face serious. "Did you see that Harrison nigga?" he asked. "No, sir," I lied. "Well, he still has that knife for you," he said. Hate tightened in me, but I kept a dead face. "Did you buy a knife yet?" he asked me. "No, sir," I answered. "Do you want to use mine?" he asked. "You've got to protect yourself, you know." "No, sir, I'm not afraid," I said. "Nigga, you a fool," he spluttered. "I thought you had some sense. Are you going to just let that nigga cut your heart out? His boss gave him a knife to use against you. Take this knife, nigga, and stop acting crazy." I was afraid to look at him. If I had looked at him, I would have had to tell him to leave me alone, that I knew he was lying, that I knew he was no friend of mine, that I knew if anyone had thrust a knife through my heart, he would simply have laughed. But I said nothing. He was the boss, and he could fire me if he did not like me. He laid an open knife on the edge of his workbench about a foot from my hand. I had a fleeting urge to pick it up and give it to him, point first into his chest, but I did nothing of the kind. I picked up the knife and put it into my pocket. "Now you're acting like a nigga with some sense," he said. As I worked, Mr. Olin watched me from his machine. Later, when I passed him, he called me. "Now, look here, boy," he said. "We told that Harrison nigga to stay out of this building and leave you alone, see? But I can't protect you when you're on the way home. You stab him before he get a chance to stab you, see?" I avoided looking at him and remained silent. "Suit yourself, nigga," Mr. Olin said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." I had to make my round of errands to deliver eyeglasses, and I stole a few minutes to run across the street to talk to Harrison. Harrison was sullen and bashful, wanting to trust me, but afraid. He told me that Mr. Olin had telephoned his boss and had told him to tell Harrison that I had planned to wait for him at the back entrance of the building at 6 o'clock and stab him. Harrison and I found it difficult to look at each other. We were upset and distrustful. Excuse me. We were not really angry at each other. We knew that the idea of murder had been planted in each of us by the white men who employed us. We told ourselves again and again that we did not agree with the white men. We urged ourselves to keep faith in each other. Yet there lingered deep down in each of us a suspicion that maybe one of us was trying to kill the other. "I am not angry with you, Harrison," I said. "I don't want to fight nobody," Harrison said bashfully, but he kept his hand in his pocket on his knife. Each of us felt the same shame, felt how foolish and weak we were in the face of the domination of the whites. "I wish they'd leave us alone," I said. "Me too," Harrison said. "There are a million black boys like us to run errands," I said. "They wouldn't care if we killed each other." "I know it," Harrison said. Was he acting? I could not believe him. We were toying with the idea of death for no reason that stemmed from our own lives, but because the men who ruled us had thrust the idea into our minds. Each of us depended upon the whites for the bread we ate, and we actually trusted the whites more than we did each other. Yet there existed in us a longing to trust men of our own color. Again, Harrison and I parted, vowing not to be influenced by what our white boss men said to us. The game of egging Harrison and me to fight, to cut each other, kept up for a week. We were afraid to tell the white men that we did not believe them, for that would have been tantamount to calling them liars or risking an argument that might have ended in violence being directed against us. One morning, a few days later, Mr. Olin and a group of white men came to me and asked me if I was willing to settle my grudge with Harrison with gloves, according to boxing rules. I told them that though I was not afraid of Harrison, I did not want to fight him and that I did not know how to box. I could feel now that they knew I no longer believed them. When I left the factory that evening, Harrison yelled at me from the block. I waited and he ran toward me. Did he want to cut me? I backed away as he approached. We smiled uneasily and sheepishly at each other. We spoke haltingly, weighing our words. "Did they ask you to fight me with gloves?" Harrison asked. "Yes," I told them, but I didn't agree. Harrison's face became eager. "They want us to fight 4 rounds for $5 apiece," he said. "Man, if I had $5, I could pay down on a suit. $5 is almost half a week's wages for me." "I don't want to," I said. "We won't hurt each other," he said. "But why do a thing like that for white men? To get $5? I don't need $5 that much." "Oh, you're a fool," he said. Then he smiled quickly. "Now, look here," I said. "Oh, you a fool," he said, then smiled quickly. "Now, look here," I said. "Maybe you are angry with me." "No, I'm not," he shook his head vigorously. "I don't want to fight for white men. I'm no dog or rooster." I was watching Harrison closely, and he was watching me closely. Did he really want to fight me for some reason of his own, or was it the money? Harrison stared at me with puzzled eyes. He stepped toward me, and I stepped away. He smiled nervously. "I need that money," he said. "Nothing doing," I said. He walked off wordlessly with an air of anger. Maybe he would stab me now, I thought. I gotta watch that fool. For another week, the white men of both factories begged us to fight. They made up stories about what Harrison had said about me, and when they saw Harrison, they lied to him the same way. Harrison and I were wary of each other whenever we met. We smiled and kept out of arm's reach, ashamed of ourselves and of each other. Again, Harrison called to me one evening as I was on my way home. "Come on and fight," he begged. "I don't want to, and quit asking me," I said in a voice louder and harder than I had intended. Harrison looked at me, and I watched him. Both of us still carried the knives that the white men had given us. "I want to make a payment on a suit of clothes with the $5, Harrison said. "But those white men will be looking at us, laughing at us," I said. "What the hell," Harrison said. "They look at you and laugh at you every day, nigga." It was true, but I hated him for saying it. I ached to hit him in his mouth, to hurt him. "What have we got to lose?" Harrison asked. I don't suppose we have anything to lose, I said. Sure, he said, let's get the money. We don't care. And now they know we know what they tried to do to us, I said, hating myself for saying it, and they hate us for it. Sure, Harrison said, so let's get the money. You can use $5, can't you? Yes. Then let's fight for him. I feel like a dog. To them, both of us are dogs, he said. Yes, I admitted. But again, I wanted to hit him. Look, let's fool them white men, Harrison said. We won't hurt each other. We'll just pretend, see? We'll show them we ain't dumb as they think, see? I don't know. It's just exercise. 4 rounds for $5. You scared? No. Then come on and fight. All right, I said. It's just exercise. I'll fight. Harrison was happy. I felt that it was all very foolish, but what the hell. I would go through with it and that would be the end of it. And I still felt a vague anger that would not leave. When the white men in the factory heard that we had agreed to fight, their excitement knew no bounds. They offered to teach me new punches. Each morning they would tell me in whispers that Harrison was eating raw onions for strength. And from Harrison I heard that they told him I was eating raw meat for strength. They offered to buy me my meals each day, but I refused. I grew ashamed of what I agreed to do and wanted to back out of the fight, but I was afraid that they would be angry if I tried to. I felt that if white men tried to persuade 2 black boys to stab each other for no reason save their own pleasure, then it would not be difficult for them to aim a wanton blow at a black boy in a fit of anger in a passing mood of frustration. The fight took place one Saturday afternoon in the basement of a Main Street building. Each white man who attended the fight dropped his share of the pot into a hat that sat on the concrete floor. Only white men were allowed in the basement. No women or Negroes were admitted. Harrison and I were stripped to the waist. A bright electric bulb glowed above our heads. As the gloves were tied on my hands, I looked at Harrison and saw his eyes were watching me. Would he keep his promise? Doubt made me nervous. We squared off, and at once I knew that I had not thought sufficiently about what I had bargained for. I could not pretend to fight. Neither Harrison nor I knew enough about boxing to deceive even a child for a moment. Now shame filled me. The white men were smoking and yelling obscenities at us. Crush that nigger's nuts, nigger. Hit that nigger. I'll fight you goddamn niggers. Sock it in his peaks. Make 'em bleed. I lashed out with a timid left. Harrison landed high on my head, and before I knew it, I had landed a hard right on Harrison's mouth, and blood came. Harrison shot a blow to my nose. The fight was on. It was on against our will. I felt trapped and ashamed. I lashed out even harder, and the harder I fought, the harder Harrison fought. Our plans and promises now meant nothing. We fought 4 hard rounds, stabbing, slugging, grunting, spitting, cursing, crying, bleeding. The shame and anger we felt for having allowed ourselves to be duped crept into our blows, and blood ran into our eyes, half blinding us. The hate we felt for the men whom we had tried to cheat went into the blows we threw at each other. The white men made the rounds last as long as 5 minutes, and each of us was afraid to stop and ask for time for fear of receiving a blow that would knock us out. When we were on the point of collapsing from exhaustion, they pulled us apart. I could not look at Harrison. I hated him, and I hated myself. I clutched my $5 in my fist and walked home. Harrison and I avoided each other after that, and we rarely spoke. The white men attempted to arrange other fights for us, but we had sense enough to refuse. I heard of other fights being staged between other black boys, and each time I heard those plans falling from the lips of the white men in the factory, I eased out of earshot. I felt that I had done something unclean, something for which I could never properly atone. Wow. That's very interesting. That sounds like, is it Mandingo fighting? What's the name of the fight that was like in Django? Where they had the slave masters would just have the men fight one another. Oh my, that's exactly what that sounds like. Very interesting. Very interesting, the things that black people have had to endure in an America with white folk. Good Lord. Well, that was chapter 12. I think it's only one chapter left, chapter 13. 14, 2 chapters left, and then it'll be over. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Check in with you again soon. Peace, love, and light. Good night.